May I ask you to take your seats? Thank you. Jetzt geht's los. This is the official opening of the Helsinki Debate on Europe, and I will, a little bit later on, tell you a little bit more about that. But first of all, I would like to introduce and welcome the host of this opening. Please, Gunvor, come up to the stage. The CEO of Hanaholmen.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's with both pride and urgency that I welcome you tonight to Hanaholmen, the Swedish-Finnish Cultural Center, as we open the Helsinki Debate on Europe 2025. This year marks a moment of dual significance, the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act and the 50th anniversary of Hanaholmen itself. And please, if you have a moment, please look at the historic exhibition at the first floor after this, if you have time. These are not merely chronological coincidences. They are symbolic milestones, intertwined in a deeper way that speaks of our shared mission. Hanaholmen was established as a meeting ground, a space for dialogue and understanding across national, cultural, and ideological borders. Likewise, the Helsinki Final Act of 1975 was a landmark in international diplomacy, an unprecedented gathering of East and West to codify a vision of peace, cooperation, and human dignity across Europe. That vision was neither naive nor without contradiction. In Moscow, the Final Act was trumpeted as a diplomatic triumph, affirming the post-war territorial status quo. Yet at the same document, in its bold articulation of human rights and fundamental freedoms, planted the seeds that would crack the foundation of authoritarianism. Today, 50 years later, we gather in a vastly different Europe and an unsettlingly familiar world. The international system that the Helsinki Final Act sought to stabilize now stands at a precarious ground. Russia's brutal war against Ukraine has shattered many of the principles enshrined in 1975. Across the Atlantic, a profound realignment in US foreign policy has shaken the multilateral order to its core. The inability to uphold a minimum of human dignity and international law in Gaza challenged our belief in the rules-based world order. The very concept of a rules-based international system, already strained, now risks collapse. The spring of 2025 has been, for many in Europe, a brutal wake-up call. We find ourselves once again at a crossroads, one that compels us to ask, what have we learned from history and where do we go from here? And I think the film that we just saw actually was a very good commentary to these questions. These are the questions that the Helsinki Debate on Europe aims to confront head-on. We do this not in the spirit of nostalgia, but with a clear-eyed commitment to the future, just as Hanaholmen was built to bridge divides between nations. The Helsinki Final Act was an attempt to create a moral framework for international relations. That framework is now being questioned. It's our responsibility and moral obligation to renew it, to defend it, and to imagine what it might look like in the world of tomorrow. Let us make this gathering more than a commemoration. Let it be a reaffirmation of diplomacy, dialogue, and democratic values, that they are not relics of a bygone age, but the tools that we must cherish and the foundation of our societies in the future as well. To conclude, I want to express the warmest thanks and appreciation from all of us at Hanaholmen to the S. Fischer Foundation and the German Academy for Language and Literature for bringing the debates on Europe to Hanaholmen. Thank you very much. And thank you also for the excellent cooperation with the Finland Institute in Berlin. I wish us all a very interesting evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunvor Kronman, the CEO of Hanaholmen. For me as a Swede, it's my first time at this place, which is sad, but I'm really proud to be here now. Many of you that come from abroad will not realize what important role this place actually plays in the relationships between Sweden and Finland. As Gunvor mentioned, the debates on Europe are initiated by two German institutions, the S. Fischer Foundation based in Berlin and the German Academy for Language and Literature based in Darmstadt. And I tend to say, and I think that I'm right, that it's not a coincidence that it's two German institutions that are carrying this European endeavor. Therefore, it's a special pleasure to welcome up here the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to Finland, Mr. Stefan Auer.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Federal Republic of Germany, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for being invited to this very important event. The Helsinki Final Act, signed 50 years ago, is more than a historic document. In fact, it is an inspiration. Today, it challenges us to reflect on the values guiding international relations. It challenges us to reflect on how we can uphold them while the ground below us continues to shift. So, metaphorically speaking, I would like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to take part in debating Europe's future here in Hanaholmen. Thus, a special thanks goes to Gunvor Kronman. Thank you for hosting us in this inspiring place. Hanaholmen, with its rich tradition of enabling dialogue and with the same birth date as the Helsinki Final Act, provides indeed the perfect setting for this. This project grew out of a shared commitment to discussing European challenges, past and present. I also welcome Carl-Henrik Fredriksson, where is he? There he is, exactly, who just spoke. As a representative of everyone involved in planning this series of events, your contribution is invaluable. Your experience shapes today's discussions, and your partner's insights gives it soul and substance. I would like to thank you as co-organizers, namely the S. Fischer Foundation, and now you hear the German name, Deutsche Akademie für Sprache und Dichtung, based in Darmstadt, as we have heard, alongside all your partners for making this happen. And to emphasize the seamless cooperation across borders, I would also like to thank Mikko Fritze from the Finland Institute in Berlin, having facilitated the planning of this event behind the scenes. We, as the German Federal Foreign Office, could not think of a stronger cooperation partner and partners. Well, maybe I should think of one in particular, namely Finland as a whole. Finland has always stood at the crossroads between East and West, a border state, a bridge builder, and a country with very broad, resilient shoulders, I should add. Over decades, Finnish diplomacy has been resilient, wise, and consistent, even in challenging times. Today, Finland continues to prove the power of dialogue. In a world marked by division, Finland's voice matters. As chair of the OSCE in 2025, Finland once again takes on responsibility, fostering dialogue, advocating human rights, rule of law, multilateralism in turbulent times. As the German ambassador to Finland, I would like to add, Germany owes much to Finland's diplomatic efforts. The Helsinki Final Act, especially the third basket on human rights, inspired civil movements in Eastern Europe. Through this, it set the stage for unity. It made the German unification possible. To us, human rights are the core of European identity. They are the mirror of our societies. Where minority rights are respected, societies thrive. The treatment of minorities reveals the soul of the majority. In this regard, we're also glad to see that this is reflected in the program. We face a changing world. Power shifts globally. Alliances are tested. Sometimes we might fear that our trusted alliances might be abandoned. There's only one solution, in my view. Europe must stand firm and united. We need to be defending our values. We need to be more resilient. We need to be bolder, and we must embrace autonomy. In this new world order, Europe must find its own voice and purpose in order to be a driver of universal values, most of all, human rights, multilateralism, and a rules-based world order. Ladies and gentlemen, for 10 years, the S. Fischer Foundation has partnered with the German Federal Foreign Office, particularly for the debates on Europe. Together, we hosted events in Minsk, Kharkiv, Narva, and St. Petersburg. We have done so with the goal of fostering change through dialogue. Our belief that conversation can pave the way for transformation should not be shaken. However, reality has been harsh. Kharkiv, once a hub for dialogue, is now scarred by war. While Ukraine suffers under a brutal war of Russia's aggression, hopes for change in Russia and Belarus remain entirely unfulfilled. Yet Europe stands united. Last weekend, the leaders of Poland, France, the UK, and Germany made a joint journey to Kiev, a powerful signal of our continued support. As Ukraine fights on, the question remains, how do we return to a world order built on the respect of the United Nations Charter, namely territorial integrity, human rights, and sovereignty as guarantors of peace? How can we maintain solidarity and unity while Europe's integration and security order is being questioned and challenged? Over the next 3 days, the Helsinki Debate on Europe will address these questions through public speeches and panel discussions, through literary readings, and above all, through your conversation as partners and participants. Leading voices from politics, literature, and civil society will share their insights. And we'll listen, discuss, and search for new perspectives. Let us seize this opportunity. Let us challenge each other. Let us imagine a better Europe. Let us think of what's beyond the brutal reality of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both the previous speakers for also being astonishingly concrete, morally sound, and analytically precise, which means that I can be a little bit shorter. Well, you have described what we are actually going to do and the context in which we're doing it in a very good way. I still just want to say a couple of words. Your Excellencies, dear participants of the Helsinki Debate of Europe, ladies and gentlemen, mina damer och herrar. It's meanwhile a little bit of a tradition that when I give this introductory remarks, I raise an old book up into the air. Recently in Sofia, this was a leaflet entitled Das Problem der Freiheit, the problem of freedom, published in 1939 by the Berman Fischer Verlag, at that time in exile in Stockholm. And that little leaflet was written by Thomas Mann. He was then addressing or preparing a speech for the PEN conference in Stockholm. And he wanted to tell his writer friends that we need to stop with this ironic distance that we have to words like justice, freedom, right, truth. These words are important, and they must be put to use. I could have raised that little leaflet today as well. But instead I've chosen another book. And this is a copy of the legendary travel guide from Baedeker. It's entitled Schweden und Finnland, also Sweden and Finland. It was published 10 years earlier than Thomas Mann's little leaflet in 1929. And what is so special about this? Well, it's the first time that Sweden and Finland are treated together by Baedeker. Up until then, in 1929, and this is the 14th edition of Baedeker's focus on Swedish, Finland had been treated together with Russia. That is a remarkable shift reflecting geopolitical realities. Just as significant as the shift represented by Finland in, and now I need to check the date, on the 4th of April in 2023, as the 31st member joined the NATO, followed by Sweden a little bit less than a year later. Again, a massive shift reflecting geopolitical realities. The Debates on Europe is a series of events that takes place, is organized in places where Europe is at stake in one way or the other. We heard before, we've been to Kharkiv in 2015, when the war in Donbass was going on. We were not so many kilometers from the front lines back then. We were a little bit later in St. Petersburg, and the difference between the atmosphere in those two cities at that time was tangible. We've been to Sarajevo and in many other places. Now we're in Helsinki. Is this not a little bit less dramatic? Not so sure. We're really at a turning point at this moment. And this very place is one of the best to try to get one's head around what is actually happening. Out here in the waters in the Baltic Sea, a hybrid war is going on, it's raging as we sit here and speak. Of course, 50 years Helsinki Final Act, but Finland is in so many other ways also a relevant place for understanding what is now happening. So, in the next few days, we will try to grapple with these very difficult questions. We have fantastic people lined up in panels, but just as important as these things that are happening on stage, in readings or in other scheduled events, are the discussions going on in between events, in coffee breaks, during dinners, at breakfasts. And this is what makes this Debates on Europe such a particularly interesting endeavor to be part of. So, before I introduce this evening's moderator, I just want to say that when we are done here in about 90 minutes, You're all invited to drink in the lobby out here to join us for that discussion that I just tried to describe. I would then ask today's panelists and the moderator to enter the stage. And while you're doing that, I will introduce the moderator. His name is Fredrik Löjdquist. He's the founding director of the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies, an institution that has risen to fame almost in Sweden in the last years. It's sad, of course, that that is the case because of the developments, but it's really an important institution in Swedish political analysis. Fredrik is also a former ambassador of Sweden to the OSCE in Vienna, and he's also the author of one of the articles that we commissioned before this event in order to provide a kind of historical backdrop and an analysis of the situation, volatile situation in which we're in. Another author of such an article is sitting next to or is also sitting on the stage, Martin Šimečka. Both these texts are available on the Debates on Europe website if you haven't read them yet. So, please, Fredrik, with no further ado, take it away.
Thank you very much, Carl-Henrik, and it's a great honor and pleasure to be here moderating this panel on 50 years of Helsinki Declaration, the beginning of the end of the Cold War. And we will look into the sort of historical context, the drivers, the aspirations, the hopes, intentions of the Helsinki Final Act at the time, but also try to look a little bit about the consequences, intended or unintended, of this, and the realization. It was seen as a turning point already then, but then the realization that it turned in maybe to another different kind of turning point later on. And I also want to address the questions that, of course, as we saw in this excellent film, it was a product of the political context of its time, but how timeless is it, how durable is it, how much of it is still of relevance today? One of the things that also addressed in the film, and I think we will hear today, this ambiguity in the beginning, did it serve to consolidate the Yalta system, as was the sort of Brezhnev's and Soviet Union intention, or did it help to demolish it, or was it both? For me, as having served as a Swedish ambassador to the OSCE, the Helsinki Final Act is really what I labeled the Old Testament of the European security order. The New Testament then being the Paris Charter in 1990, which was in its way an equally amazing document. And as truly Christians, you also know that you need the New Testament to fulfill the Old Testament and so forth. Because the Paris Charter then, of course, deepened this comprehensive concept of security, the connection between what's going on within states, respect for democracy, human rights, and rule of law, with security between states. And like any Old Testament, it of course also has its 10 commandments, the 10 founding principles. I will not read them all here, but I think they're very useful to return to these and read them every now and then. But of course, it's the now I lost it on my telephone here. It's particularly one of these articles, one of the 10 commandments, that turned out to be so important, and that is Article 7, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. We can also see now today that Russia is and has been for quite some time, at least since 2014, in violation of all of these 10 founding principles of this Old Testament. And I want to finish up the discussion here a little bit on where we are now and how relevant the Helsinki Final Act is. We will speak, the panelists will bring their personal experience and reflections as practitioners, as human rights activists and so forth. I'm a little bit younger, but I'm basically the same generation, I think, as Arthur, the film director. I was 8 years old in 1975, but I have a story. I'm basically the generation, so I'm born in 1967, which means that I belong to the 1989 generation. 1989 was really what fostered me and has shaped my life, my professional career, everything since. But already before that, my first conscious political act, I think at the end of 1981, 1982, I bought this badge, which I still have, of Solidarność. And I had actually already read Solzhenitsyn at that age that we saw here. And of course, the next moment is 1981, 1991. And in 2012, I started then as Swedish OSCE ambassador. And I think before glooming, this is not a funeral party, we're not here to bury the Helsinki Final Act. But I think what happened in the beginning of the 80s, when the first effects of the Helsinki Final Act, we could sense them and feel them, and the transformative power, the unexpected transformative power of this. We saw this. I think the second renaissance, or the big renaissance for Europe and European security was, of course, the fall of the Berlin Wall and what happened in 1989 and 91. And I think we are now at the turning point where the whole future of the European project, the European security order, not only for Russia, not only for Ukraine, is at stake in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And I tend to see this as an opportunity to have the next renaissance, to write the next chapter of the story towards a Europe whole, free and at peace, namely that we can also include Ukraine and countries like Moldova into the European project. I must warn you, and we will have I think, quite natural focus on the human rights and the comprehensive concept of security here. I was sometimes jokingly and sometimes half-jokingly, as a Swedish ambassador in Vienna 2012 to 17, labeled as the human rights Ayatollah. Even by some European colleagues. But that's because I'm a really very strong component of this comprehensive concept of security, that we can't have security between states without respect for human rights, democracy, rule of law within states, and a common set of norms. The choreography here tonight is that we will, I've asked the panelists to make short, brief introductory remarks from their respective vantage points, 3-4 minutes. Then we will have a conversation here on the stage, following up and trying to deepen and broaden that discussion. And then the last 30-40 minutes open up for questions and comments from the audience, and then return back to the panel. And I think we have a slightly less than 90 minutes, maybe 80 minutes, something like that. But I think that will be ample of time for a good and rich discussion with that. On the stage here, and no long introductions, but we have Pertti Torstila, retired Finnish diplomat. You were already from the beginning of the 70s involved in the Helsinki conference and the preparations, and served also at the Finnish ambassador to the CSE 89 to 92. You've also been ambassador to Stockholm and State Secretary for Foreign Affairs in the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Some of you may have seen older editions of the program, and you saw that Pertti is now replacing Jaakko Iloniemi, who unfortunately could not join us here today, but you were there right from the beginning also. And then we have Sonja Biserko, founder and president of the Helsinki Committee for Human Rights in Serbia, and you also worked as a Yugoslav diplomat in the 1970s. Then Martin Šimečka, Slovak journalist and writer, editor at the newspaper Denik, N, is that pronounced correctly? And a dissident in Czechoslovakia in the 1970s and 80s. And then Jacques Rupnik, is that? Rupnik? A French political scientist born in Prague, senior research fellow at CERI and professor at Sciences Po and College of Europe, and former advisor to Václav Havel. But Pertti, what do you want to bring to discussion and table tonight?
Thank you, Fredrik. I will take a mic. Thank you, Fredrik. I would like to begin with a piece of history, not 50 years ago, but 56 years ago, from the earliest days of the Helsinki Process. The Soviet Union in March '69 proposed a European Security Conference to sanction the borders after the Second World War. Similar ideas, we all remember, had been launched already in the 50s, but they were all rejected by the West. Finland reacted 1 month after the Soviet proposal in a memorandum backing the Soviet idea and thereby risking the credibility of its neutrality. Why? Why did we do that? Well, if you can't beat them, join them. In diplomacy, this means that if you don't want, or if you cannot answer yes or no, table your own proposal. And we put out a proposal of our own, which was different from the Soviet paper. Yes, we considered the conference idea useful, but only if it were well prepared and convened without preliminary conditions. Nailing down the post-war borders, this was the original Soviet plan, we insisted that the conference should not be confined to borders only. It should address broader security problems and open avenues of cooperation as well. This is how the C letter, the second C letter, reappeared. Also, the invitation was sent to the US and Canada. This was not the case with the Soviet document. The conference, we pointed out, was not between the Europeans only, but between all countries responsible for European security, including the 2 North American countries. As the European Security Conference became Security Conference in Europe. And finally, Finland offered to act as a host for the conference and gave the idea that its first fixed element, the site. For a long time, there was widespread reasoning that the Finnish initiative was inspired, if not outright ordered, from the Soviet Union. And this was incorrect. Moscow exerted strong pressure on us, but we had our own reasons to launch the initiative. In the Kremlin, the Finnish points were seen as an oblique movement, but there was not much the Soviets could do without undermining their long campaign for the conference. Very few believed those days that the 2 proposals would lead to any real result. Nixon and Kissinger in the White House were deeply suspicious of Soviet plans. We in Finland didn't have illusions either, but the move was made, and the trigger behind our action, an independent initiative, distanced the Finnish initiative from the Soviet proposal. And it reinforced Finnish neutral position. A Finnish ambassador was sent to the world. He made over 50 visits to the capitals explaining why this conference, why now, and why Finland. Moods started to change. Then with Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik, interest in staging the conference started to emerge. And finally with the Germany's Eastern treaties, the Western conditions were removed. Door was opened for the preparatory talks in Dipoli on the outskirts of Helsinki, and they were opened in November 1972. 3 years later, in summer in Helsinki, the final act was signed. Feelings were mixed. Brezhnev returned to Moscow in triumph. President Ford got the cold shoulder at home and lost re-election. British ambassador wrote in his report, British ambassador here in Helsinki, hard to say what this means for the world, who won, who lost. I don't know, but one thing is for sure, Finland came out of this as a winner. And happy Finnish Prime Minister sighed with relief, Christmas is over, but the presents remain. We had achieved what we were after. We had successfully hosted a historical summit, and our place among the European neutrals was confirmed. And then your 3 points.
Please.
Very briefly. First point, don't fix it if it ain't broken. The principles have been violated, but the principles are intact. They stand firm. Therefore, we must keep them and the OSCE alive. Second point, with Russia, we are facing a very difficult dilemma. We're not dealing with the Ukrainian crisis. We are dealing with Russian crisis. Stability in Europe is not possible without Russia, but how to go forward? And the third problem, the third question, third point is the problem of impunity. If we don't settle this thing, we will face a very dangerous and unpredictable world. Impunity. That's my third point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pertti, and also for setting this historical framing. Sonja, you were both active as a diplomat for a country which no longer exists, and then, but also active then as a human rights activist in a country which exists now. So what's your take on this?
Thank you. I would just like to start with a comment relating to 70s. While I was in London as a young diplomat, Helsinki Act was already in place. It was really shifting shifting understanding of international relations, and it very much reflected on how Yugoslavia acted, because Yugoslavia embraced Helsinki Act as something which matched with its non-aligned policy. And I assume that Yugoslavia had an important role in contributing to the process of in this conference. It also shows that it was appointed as the next organizer of follow-up conference in Belgrade in 1977. But my experience while being in London is also something that I must recall at this moment, because there was already debate or discussion within academic and diplomatic circles what will happen with Tito when he dies. And he was already very old at that time. And I was really stuck, and I didn't have a prepared answer for that. But however, I think at that time Yugoslavia, which was considered a liberal socialist country, already underwent processes which apparently brought to its end in 90s. Constitution 1974, which apparently provided a framework for Yugoslavia to survive, I would say. And this is something which Serbia challenged already in 1977. They came, and immediately after Tito's death, they started preparing for re-centralization of Yugoslavia. That was really the two opposing concepts of what Yugoslavia should look like in this new phase of rearrangement of Yugoslav sort of concept, I would say. And the rest of the republics rejected this proposal, and that's how we started to go towards the end of Yugoslavia. Serbia also rejected the Hague Conference document from '91, which apparently was the last chance to survive, to keep the state framework of Yugoslavia, and then what followed we all know about. Anyway, the Helsinki Act was very important in inciting all kinds of civic society reactions, initiatives, watchdog organizations fighting for individual rights, political rights, minority rights, national rights, all kinds of rights. Of course, Yugoslavia was one-party system, though there were 8 parties. I would say each republic had its own communist party and also autonomous provinces. But so we can say it was a kind of pluralistic one-party system. But this was still each of these entities apparently had sort of were very cautious about political rights when they were challenged, and there were a lot of trials, and you know that there was a very dynamic period of the country, considering how complex it was and how difficult it was to manage, since there was no real leader or political elite that was able to manage this. And of course, Serbia took opportunity of that and got army on its side, and we know how it ended. But however, civic society was very important and very vibrant during the war years in the 90s, first of all in opposing the war, then dealing with refugees, with minorities, which were the most, which were objectives of this war, not the consequences. Because each of these, the Serbian idea of the bigger Serbia was really an ethnic state. Of course, it also relates to other countries, but in the successor countries. And this is a problem that we face nowadays because the Western Balkans didn't make through. The transition was very difficult, and we don't know where we go, apparently. And it is something that it's important to acknowledge that at that time, international community, EU and OSCE were not able to cope with the Yugoslav crisis. It was considered as an aberration, I would say, more than something that will come up and affect the whole entire world. It was the United States which stopped the war, and it is the country which is perceived as a security guarantor of the region. And it is very troublesome. We don't know what America will do in the period ahead of us, though so far they have repeated their support for Bosnia, Kosovo, and the countries in the region. Well, I think it's the Helsinki Committee family in the region, because each of the successor states created its own Helsinki. The Yugoslav Helsinki fell apart along the national lines, which was formed in 1986, I think. And this is, we all related to the Helsinki principles. It was very important for what we did in the region. We also acted through International Helsinki Federation, which was part of the Helsinki process as well. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but in the meantime, Helsinki committees either disappeared or slowed down, and somehow they are not so effective as they have been in the decade between 90s and 2000. The first Helsinki Committee that was set up in former Yugoslavia was Kosovo Helsinki Committee, because it was an issue which was apparently used by Serbia or Belgrade to open Serbian question, so-called, and mobilize Serbs throughout the Yugoslavia. And this is how it was one of the topics, human rights topics, for most of the Western countries to sort of confront Yugoslav government with. And unfortunately, Serbia was not allowing to sort of treat the Kosovo in a way that could help Yugoslavia maybe to survive in one or the other form. What we have today in Serbia, I would say, is very important to have in mind, because we have very, wide popular uprising, which is led by student protests already for 6, now 7 months. And I would say that that was some kind of liberation of the society of fear, and also awakening of the society after 40 years being kept in this propaganda mode. This is some kind of, becoming aware of its own power to react, to sort of to challenge the government, which apparently over the last few years has really increased the repression, which has not been able to relate to the society, especially to the protests. The government is not able to sort of handle the crisis, deep crisis that we are in. It is highly corrupt government. Corruption is very deep. It's not only worldwide, it's really here with us. And also, there are a lot of criminal groups which are operating and are so-called loyalists that our government is relying on. They occupy the park in front of the presidency and Republican Assembly. But despite all this, I think this process, protests are deeply rooted, and this is beginning of the process, which will last maybe a decade or even more. It doesn't mean that these people have articulate political options they would like to see in the country. However, these students went to Strasbourg and Brussels to complain and to present the situation in Serbia, which is very important. They didn't go to Moscow or any other place. So this is kind of development that we have now in the country. It is on the edge, I would say, and I think we need a helping hand, and maybe OSCE could be one hand which would provide some kind of framework for the dialogue, which is much needed in the society because students are too young, though they know what they want. Maybe they don't have too much know-how or experience, but it would be important to help them to, and help Serbia as such, in order not to fall apart. And I would say, just to add one more comment relating to what Yugoslavia presented in 1948 as the first country which broke up with the Stalinist bloc, and it was really the beginning of the process of sort of liberalization of the Eastern Bloc. So Yugoslavia was perceived in most of the Eastern countries as an example which they referred to, which they wanted to look like, and this is some kind of very specific position, I would say, because Yugoslavia was between the two blocs with its non-alignment policy, which was only from today's perspective, I can say, it has more relevance than it was maybe attributed to at the time when it was existing, because the West supported Yugoslavia because it was one way of keeping away this bloc away from Russia, from Soviet bloc. So, but I think it's worthwhile going back in this experience and see how it can be reframed. And I think also OSCE needs to be reframed to the situations that we live nowadays, and that we are confronting all these challenges, not only from Russia, but also from United States, which apparently is giving up on Europe. And this is maybe this served more as a wake-up call for Europe than maybe Putin's aggression.
Right.
So this is, I would end here.
Thank you, Sonja. I mean, clearly there's still unfinished business of the European project, but also you're pointing to the relevance of the transformative power of human rights and civil society and so forth. Martin, you had, as a young man, a very physical, concrete experience of Charta 77 and the sort of the wider context of the Helsinki Final Act and so forth. And also coming from a country which no longer exists, but that were able to change the frontiers according to the principles of Helsinki Final Act in a peaceful manner and so forth.
Well, I was thinking, I'm not going to the geopolitical details about Helsinki Act, so I will try to focus very shortly about the consequences of that in the country of Czechoslovakia, where I've been. And I was part of this dissident, not movement, but I was 18 in that time. However, I mean, and I am still thinking about that as a deeper lesson. I'm not sure whether the diplomats in Helsinki, all the world leaders, had in their minds. I mean, Brezhnev definitely not. But even the Western leaders, whether they understood what they have done. I think they might think like, we give you the tool and you can use it. I mean, thinking about the Eastern Europeans. And it's the deeper lesson is, I'm even not sure about that. But however, I mean, the deeper lesson is that I was a witness of that, how it was the tool, how it was used, and how the creativity and imagination and courage, of course, if you give a tool and you know how to use it, it can change the world, or it can change at least your country. And the thing is that, well, I didn't believe in that when I was 18, when Charter 7, I was already 20. I really didn't believe in that. What is this document? What are you writing about some Helsinki Act, whatever, what it is. The thing is that, but I was young, I was stupid and young, so the friends of mine like Václav Havel and the others who wrote the Charter 77 based on the Helsinki Act, there was a thing that the regime, like in Czechoslovakia, the totalitarian regime, and it's all about, for example, as well today, Russia, but in that times, that regime was completely artificial in the sense that the words didn't mean anything except it was, they meant only propaganda. And they were completely controlled. So nothing in that state could be said, written or published without the control of the state. And all these words were just pure propaganda, completely artificial, creating artificial world, in which I think even the leaders of the communist leaders even believed in that world. I think Brezhnev believed in that world. So they signed the act, thinking, okay, this is just words, we will not. But Czechoslovakia, still communist system, still was based on legitimization of itself. It has its own laws and followed them and all the time. And the fact was that Czechoslovakia, the parliament agreed with the Helsinki Act, all these huge, whatever, even the third basket, and it became in October 76 part of the law, which actually was, the validity of that was bigger than the own Czechoslovak laws. So that was a trick. They didn't know what they did. And the dissidents understood, okay, so this is now official. You say human rights, and it's a law. So they said, okay, unlike totalitarian regime, which were completely, completely artificial, it was pretending all the time, as if, it was a famous joke in Czechoslovakia, even in a basic life, that the people, the joke was saying that we pretend that we work, and you communists pretend that you pay us. So everything was just pretending. And now the dissidents came, taking these words seriously, saying to the regime, look, you signed that, it's a law. We demand that the law should be real in our life. Of course the regime reacted furiously. That was a typical situation. But when I think about that today, I still think that even today there are situations we don't know about, but the difference between the free world or free people and all the dictators is that we have imagination and creativity. And if we get some tools, we can make it as a victory. That's a lesson from Helsinki Act. About the future, that's the next debate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Martin. And I really recommend to read Martin's essay and also some of the skepticism you had and so forth. And turning points and different turning points for different people. Jacques, you also straddled. You were born in Prague, but worked and have your career in France. So a little bit a foot in both worlds, in Central Europe and in Western Europe. So what are your take on this? What is your take on?
Well, I just follow on what has been said very well about, I would call it unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. We know about the diplomatic process. You just referred to reasons why the communists signed this without thinking that it would matter. But suddenly a new type of opposition emerged, which no longer demanded from the regime to change in the name of its ideology. That was a pre-68 thing. You have to change this and that in order to be true to the socialist idea. You are breaking, So this was, and that ended with Russian tanks in Prague, basically. The Russian tanks in Prague destroyed that idea. So there is a new opposition that is born in a different context, which no longer asks neither the overthrow of the regime nor to improve socialism, but ask them, you know, you just signed this, please implement it. Simultaneously, actually, with the Helsinki Act, they also endorsed the International Covenant on Human Rights. You combine the two things, you have Charter 77, and you have the idea, and that is the important legacy, the idea that civil society has a role as an actor in, not just in domestic politics, but in diplomacy, in international relations. The whole story of the third basket, the whole review conferences that you are familiar with, you know, in Belgrade, in Madrid, in Vienna. I followed all of them at the time very, very closely. And at each stage of the review conferences, you could see the impact of a civil society on that. And that was made possible because of the echo it had in the West. If it was just a domestic problem, say, you could clamp down on it domestically. No, there was an echo in the West, in the Western media, in Western civil society, in Western public opinion. Something like a European public space was emerging in a condition of a divided Europe. There was a dialogue. Sometimes I feel there was perhaps more of a dialogue in those days than sometimes today. Okay, I'm overstating the case deliberately, but you understand what I'm getting at. So that is it. And there's a great book about Helsinki by a French diplomat who was in charge of Helsinki and the review processes, you know, Jacques Rupnik. And the book is called Le Piège, the trap. And you say, what trap? Well, for Brezhnev, yeah, it was a trap. You sign this, and we consolidate our power, our conquest from World War II. But there was also the other trap, the other meaning of the trap, which is the third basket trap, and the idea that civil society can take over a process. And that idea of unintended consequences, yeah, the unpredictability of history. I think this is a phrase that Václav Havel used. I had invited him for the 20th anniversary of 1989, and he spoke about that, the unpredictability of history. Yeah, you think it's all set, you have divided it, you signed the diplomatic, and it gets out of control. And this is what you were getting at. The second point I would say is how diplomacy and human rights, or foreign policy and human rights. This is a big debate, you know, between idealists and realists. I will not inflict that on you at this stage, but it is part of that legacy for the reasons I had just referred to. You could trace it back to '68 as well. Again, the 68ers, and I'm not now talking about Eastern Europe, I'm talking about in the West. Take the 68ers in France, who I had observed at close range, being 18 as well, but in '68, I'm slightly older than you. And what 68 was the year when Bernard Kouchner found Doctors Without Borders. So it's the idea, we are not waiting for the revolution, we are not waiting for a new socialism. This is a move away from that kind of '68, and it was going into, you know, there is a famine in Biafra. We are doctors, we are going to help them. And then you had all sorts of others, you know, Journalists Without Borders, etc. A few years ago, a Finnish colleague asked me, would I join the Association of Historians Without Borders? Yes, why not? You know, I'm of course all for it. But this borderless ideology, as you understand, is the post-68 thing and post-Helsinki thing, of course, this idea of interaction. It's something that is totally contradictory to what is happening today. You know, so you try to propose people the idea of borderless world. No, everybody is building borders, fences, trying to seclude themselves, protect themselves, etc., etc. So, but that was part of that legacy, and of course, in the what was called the right to interfere, droit d'ingérence, the right to interfere. And Helsinki was part of that. The third basket was a possibility to interfere. You could point, you know, to violations, etc. And then a right to interfere during the war in Yugoslavia became the right to, do we have right to intervene, to protect people who are being under threat? If there is a threat of ethnic cleansing, should you just interfere by saying this is bad, you shouldn't be doing it, or should you actually stop it? So this was another debate, and I would say what is known as R2P, responsibility to protect, is in a way the result of that. Irony of history, the R2P is adopted at the very moment when you have the war in Iraq, which kills it. So it's still it's dead at the beginning, and it's the end of that cycle, which is post-68 cycle, but also post-Helsinki cycle. So that is the second point. And okay, I've run out of time. Okay, I was just going to say that our world has changed, and that therefore, you know, if Europe stands for some of that legacy we were just talking about, this is very different in times when nobody else shares that perspective. This is very difficult. We have Russia, we have our American ally, which was very ambivalent about the whole process from the beginning. Basically, yeah, in a world which is totally hostile, which is with neo-imperial nostalgias. You know, you want a bit of Ukraine, you want a bit of Groenland or Canada, etc. In that world, what we stand for as Europeans, as a peace project in time of war, and as a democratic liberal project in times of rising authoritarianism. How can we sustain that? But I think the best way to remain faithful to some of the legacies we have been talking about is trying to preserve it, at least within the European framework, before wanting to, or hoping to extend it elsewhere.
Thank you, and thank you for these introductions. A little bit longer than I had perhaps intended, but I think a very rich base. And I will ask, you know, the two questions here, and then we will open up for questions from the audience. So please prepare yourself mentally. But I will ask first one first question on sort of the transformative power, not only in terms of underlining the importance of human rights and democracy for security policy, but also in terms of how we view international relations. And I think this picks up, it's a natural continuation of what you were saying, Jacques, and I think we can't avoid this sort of liberal realist discussion. And then I will come back to a question of today's Russia, but we will come back today. But my first question, and please short, distinct answers, those who want to answer. How revolutionary was actually the Helsinki Final Act in how we view and understand international relations? One could make the argument that until between 1648 and 1975, we lived in the Westphalian systems, which means that security, international security is a question what happens between states. But what happens within states is of no relevance for that. And it was opening up for this comprehensive concept of security that was then developed and deepened in the Paris Charter, and of course in what is now ironically the Moscow Declaration, where it was explicitly stated that respect for democracy, human rights and rule of law is of interest for all participating states, and opening up this interference, as you said. Was it really, I think it was a revolutionary thing, and it changed the nature of international relations, and there's something to stick to here. But did we understand it at the time? And we talked here about the unintended consequences. What it looked like that Brezhnev got sort of the consolidation of the Yalta system, but actually we had sort of the breakup of the communist totalitarian East and so forth. But my question again, and this is also for the future, the lessons learned, how much we need to stick to this, or are we going back to a Westphalian understanding of international security? Any short, brief reflections on this topic to the panelists. And Pertti,
Yeah,
you are ready.
I will answer your question, but before that, I will tell you about an incident or episode in Dipoli talks 72, where no one knew what's going to happen. 35 countries sitting around the table, a hexagonal table, no instructions, very creative, new minds, innovative diplomacy, incredible conference. This hexagonal table was okay with all, but West Germans wanted to be seated next to the East Germans. We were told that the separation would give an impression about two different countries, which was not in line with the German Basic Treaty. The German Democratic Republic, of course, opposed this. The English alphabetical order, which we had taken as given, nameplates were already printed in English, would have placed Finland and France between the two Germanys, federal and German. This arrangement was okay with GDR, but the FRG was adamantly against it. They said that they will leave the meeting unless they are not seated next to the German Democratic Republic. This told us that already in November 1972, a possibility of reunification of the two German states at the future point sometimes was in the back of the head of the Federal Republic. Last minute, during the night before the opening of the meeting, we, the Finnish Secretariat, changed everything into the French alphabetical order, thus making it possible to seat the FRG next to the GRD. Allemagne, Federal Republik, Allemande Republik Demokratik. When the East Germans protested, we said that as we host, we follow the Helsinki established embassy list, which had always been and is still today in French. Dipoli consultations were ready to begin. How revolutionary, Fredrik? Yeah, absolutely. Very revolutionary. Of course, the Helsinki Final Act, it confirmed the post-World War status quo, but it transcended it. It laid down the principles of peace and established a rules-based security order in Europe. Security is not gained by erecting fences. Security is gained by opening doors, said the Finnish president, 1973 at the ministerial meeting in Helsinki. Well, security does not grow from tanks and guns only. It grows from people's contacts over the dividing lines, family reunifications, free travel, free communication, and human rights violations are not an internal issue, but an international one. These were the basic elements, and they were huge. All of a sudden, international human rights became an integral part of security policy. And this is one very important point in the Helsinki Final Act.
And of today, of course, because the comprehensive concept of security that was there to exactly oppose the developments we have seen in Russia, where sort of the internal repression and the external aggression goes hand in hand. But other comments, who wants to comment, did this change our paradigm on viewing international relations? And is it still valid?
Yeah, I'm not an international expert, but I see it as a revolutionary act, of course, because it led to revolutions in '89. I mean, the direct impact is definitely the revolution in '89. But the thing is that the difference is that you had in Helsinki, all the actors had their own interest to sign the act. Various reason and various interest. So it was possible to do this revolutionary act. The problem of today that you don't have these actors together. They are different actors who don't have the interest to sign anything because they want to lead a war. And well, it's my naive idea, but I think that it's a European project. I mean, America was there. Kissinger couldn't love that, of course, because he loved Westphalian peace. In his book, he celebrated Westphalian peace as the biggest event in world history. But I still believe, I mean, yes, this is European project, but the rest of the world, I'm not so sure about that.
Any other, Sonja, please?
I think that Ukraine war and the new administration in America apparently revealed the weaknesses and vulnerability of Europe because it was under the umbrella of United States for so long. And it's really a moment for Europe to wake up and start to sort of redefine and protect European project, because both sides are aiming at destroying European project, not only security one, but also EU. So I think it's very important, apart from the diplomatic level, to sort of sensitize and aware, start the process of waking up European citizens to what it means. And I think that at this moment, not too many people are aware that Ukraine war is European war. That's how it starts. And I think there should be more focus on civic society, which can mobilize, more focus on media, which would inform and fight all these disinformation sort of processes, and really work hard on to sort of elevate the consciousness of the society in order to, for leadership to sort of reframe security architecture of Europe, but also EU, because at this point I must go back to the Balkans again. I think enlargement strategy should be really be meant, not only prolonged, conditioned by this and that. After all, none of the Eastern European countries or Bulgaria, Romania were accepted under some criteria and norms. And I think, I don't know why should Western Balkans be kept for so long and so vulnerable strategically, because Russia can very easily raise tensions in the region, and in Serbia, through Serbia and Republika Srpska, they also have a foot in Montenegro, Macedonia. So why do you keep Balkans away from these structures? I mean, NATO and EU. Serbia is unwilling, though it is always claiming that it is on the EU way, which is not true, opposite to it. But I mean, there should be more effort made, not only now in the line are Montenegro and Albania, but what about Macedonia? Macedonia did everything that it was asked from her, even changed the name. So this is one corner of Europe which is totally neglected. And European Union especially has all tools to do something and close down the Balkan issue. So this is, I think, the aspect which is very rarely mentioned as a real problem. It's not only Ukraine, which is now, of course, the priority, but Western Balkans can again become a problem for Europe.
Jacques, do you want to say anything as a historical point of view?
I could just add what has just been said. Yugoslavia is an interesting case because Yugoslavia was a key player in the Helsinki. You've seen in the film, you know, Marshal Tito, etc., and non-alignment, and that fitted in that spirit of Helsinki. And so it was a player in the Helsinki world, in the non-aligned world, etc. And it has been said that Helsinki has contributed to the downfall of the communist regime and therefore to 1989. But 1989 is also what triggered the undoing of Yugoslavia. So this is a paradox, you know, of these historical legacies. So we should return to Helsinki in former Yugoslavia.
Pertti, I'm having spent, as you have, I spent 5 years in Hofburg, where the OSCE meets daily and weekly. And I think there are some people that are happy for this alphabetical French alphabetical, but for totally different reasons, because this is also the only order that separates Armenia from Azerbaijan, because USA are right in between. And anyone who has attended sort of the weekly meetings of the Permanent Council in Vienna knows that Armenia and Azerbaijan often sort of...
Happily, we had only 35
in those days.
Not 57.
But turning to Russia and Soviet Union, I think in the glory days of the 1990s, when the CSE turned into the OSCE, We understood that we can only build common security together based on common values and common norms and based on common principles. And we all operated with the idea of a normative convergence, so to say, in Europe. There was a European project built on the normative convergence. And we thought, what we thought was the sort of post-war order was based on the UN Charter, the Charter of Human Rights, Helsinki Final Act, and the Paris Charter. But it became obvious, it should have become obvious, at least since the beginning of 2000s, that when Russia spoke about international law and the post-war order, they really meant Yalta. And when Putin, I think it was already in 2004 or 2005, said that the breakup of the Soviet Union was the largest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, that should have given some food for thought on where we're going, and we were really realizing that we were really dealing with a normative divergence. And I think we see what Putin now is doing, and I don't like the term war in Ukraine because we have a Russian aggression against Ukraine. This is not a Ukraine crisis. I think it's a Russia crisis that you mentioned, Pertti. But it's not only that. This is not a war in Eastern Europe in faraway places that we know little about. This is a systematic attack from Russia on the whole idea of the European security order, of international law. And I think what they're doing is really totally contradictory to Helsinki and the spirit of Helsinki, because they want to establish spheres of influence, no principle of equal sovereignty. But also Soviet Union and Brezhnev, as we saw here, late Soviet Union was a status quo power. Brezhnev wanted to consolidate Yalta and the results of the Second World War. Putin's Russia is a revisionist, revanchist, colonial, imperial power, and so forth. Now there are sort of realists who would argue that, yes, this is what we've been saying all the time, all this talk about norms and values and principles, that's just blah, blah, blah. It's really military power balance and so forth that can bring stability and so forth. So let's declare dead the idea of a European security order. It's dead. It's rubbish. And I would argue strongly against that, because the principles of Helsinki, but then also later of Paris, which also deepened. Helsinki doesn't speak of democracy. It speaks about human rights, but not democracy. And democracy came in sort of in the Paris Charter. But it also speaks for something that was extremely important for countries like Finland and Sweden, of the sovereign right for each country to make its own independent choices of security policy and alignment or non-alignment. But how now, with Russia's the most large-scale and most brutal aggression, military aggression in Europe since the Second World War, combined with nuclear blackmail, and they clearly want to establish a new order. We are dealing with not only an increasingly authoritarian but a quasi or neo-totalitarian system. We have to go back, a bit into the 80s before we have the same level of repression in Russia. How do we deal with, you mentioned impunity, and I think to uphold a normative system, a rules-based system, a normative regulatory ideal, you need to have accountability. But how do we deal with holding Russia now accountable? Should we stick to the principles also as a means of holding Russia accountable? Or should we just look for, there are some who argue that we need to have a new security order. Sometimes they mix this with the concept of security architecture. But how do we deal now with Russia going forward for the European project and European security order? Should we remain? And I think it's a false dichotomy, this realist, idealist one. And I think in order to uphold the norms-based order, which is normally seen as an idealist position, I don't see any contradiction of having a strong military defense and deterrence to uphold that, the principles of sovereign territorial integrity. I think this is a false dichotomy. Or should we just think that, Helsinki Final Act was a beautiful thing of history. It belongs in the history books, but we now need to look for a new system in Europe. Big question, short answers. Pertti, you're still holding the microphone.
it doesn't surprise you if I say that I'm a rules-based man. And so I simply cannot follow this realist school of thought, Kissinger, Mersheimer. These two approaches are in clear contrast with each other. Let's take a real-world example. Ukraine, Helsinki OSCE approach. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a clear breach of agreed norms, sovereignty, borders, peaceful resolution of disputes, human rights. This is the Helsinki approach. A realist view is the war is a result of NATO expansion, which threatens Russia's sphere of influence. Great powers have the right to react to threats in their neighborhood. This is the Mersheimer school. And the clash of these two schools unfortunately defines many of today's global tensions, especially where legal norms confront geopolitical ambitions. It's not only Ukraine and Russia, we see these examples all over the world. And therefore, the only way forward is the Helsinki Final Act or Paris Charter, fact-based rules, politics played by the rules. I mean, it's obvious that comes from a representative of a small country, but I think that we all agree on this. More difficulties to convince those who seem to be now in the rear. I mean, the protagonists of the power political school, how to restrict their influence.
But this also means then, and I personally totally agree with you, but that means that we have to continue to talk about human rights, democracy, and rule of law, Russia, because that's a necessary precondition for any kind of stability and peace in Europe. Would you agree with that? Because we talk less and less about, we just accept the fact that the way Putin runs Russia, so to say.
But if we don't solve the impunity question in the case of Russia, which is an absolute necessity in my mind, we will face a very dangerous situation.
Right.
And I don't want to see Vladimir Putin sitting at the big table with the other big guys in the coming future.
Any contrasting views? You should have a debate here, discussion. Isn't all this illusory, naive ideas about principles and Decalogue and commandments? Don't we live in a new world?
Yeah, I understand all this. I mean, even the question itself, what kind of attitude is better or realist versus idealist? But I have to, and I listen, and you are. I mean, yeah, I understand the diplomats. I understand perfectly how it's a different world where I live. I'm from Slovakia, and I can tell you one thing. I live all my life of two fears. I mean, but I'm scared twice. The first, I'm scared of Russia all my life. After occupation of Czechoslovakia, it's just an instinct of Eastern European. We are scared of this barbarian state. They are barbarians. They are not, you cannot make a deal with them unless they pretend they are civilized. But they even don't. So that's what I have this terrible fear, which blocks me probably from diplomatic thinking. Because well, how can you deal with, you can deal only with the courage how to defend yourself, what the Ukrainians do. And the second fear is that Western Europe does not understand my fears. All my life, I live with it. And Helsinki Act actually was part of that. They made a deal with the Soviet Union. And what about me, living in Czechoslovakia? What about me? I felt it that time as a Western Europe, as a traitors. And after '89, of course, it looked nice, but I still had this fear. I had it all the time. I have it even now, although I of course, I can say at least something has changed. But I can tell you what happened in my own mind in 2014 when the annexation of Crimea. First time in my life, I got a little bit relaxed because first in my lifetime, Western Europe started to be scared. So I thought, okay, finally, do you get it? Finally. Well, they didn't. They did it maybe in 2022, but still not enough. And that's my problem. Western Europe is not aware, my fear is not about myself. I mean, it's about you. You just don't, I shouldn't tell it looking at you.
Tell it to the Finns.
It's just,
we have a certain understanding.
No, it's about Western Europe still does not understand. And Zelensky tells them all the time. And I understand that, Russia seems to be far away. Well, it's not, there are barbarians at the gate. And that's I was just to say, I don't know the solution. I think the only thing is to defend military yourself and to show the power, to show the strength. There is nothing, any kind of diplomatic speech was nonsense today. Putin didn't go to Istanbul. Of course not. Why should he? Well, of course, it's sacrificing something to defend yourself. But this is the only way how to deal with them until the Russia is not weak enough that, like Brezhnev, they will come to ask for negotiations.
So I want to open up very soon for the audience, but Jacques, Sonja, how can we hold Russia accountable, and is Helsinki Final Act a useful tool?
Well, just to follow up, yeah, the West Europeans took time to get it, and some of them don't get it still. But let me also mention that a number of people in Eastern Europe who should know better don't quite get it either. And I will not name...
naming my prime minister. Yeah, you are right. You are right.
Okay, so this is my...
We had two European leaders who attended the 9th May in Moscow.
And then one word about, you referred to Brezhnev. Yeah, Brezhnev is, I want to consolidate World War II, where Red Army arrived. That is my domain. And yours is yours, mine is mine, and let's call it détente. So that was, Brezhnev's version of conservative realism. Brezhnev's definition of, it's away from revolutionary ideology. What is real is socialist, what is socialist is real. Well, that's the utmost definition of conservative. So he signs Helsinki as a conservative. Then comes 89, Paris Charter, but that's Gorbachev. And Gorbachev did something else. Gorbachev is in a completely different... when Gorbachev goes to United Nations in 1989 and says, renunciation of the use of violence. Okay, so here is the boss of the empire, inherited from Brezhnev, who says, renunciation of violence. And second thing he says, nobody has monopoly on truth. Well, if that is the case, welcome to the Socialist International. The whole Bolshevik thing, the whole Bolshevik revolution was precisely on that. We have monopoly on truth, and we are ready to use violence to impose it, the happy future on you people who don't understand it. So you need a Gorbachev to make the Paris Charter possible, but we are with Putin. And Putin, you mentioned the phrase about he who doesn't, what was the phrase? He who doesn't feel the pain or the sorrow for the loss of the Soviet Union has no soul, has no heart. But he added at that time, that was 10, 15 years ago, but he who wants to rebuild it has no brain. There's no reason. Well, he has lost his reason. Well, he has lost his reason. And this imperialist assault is something where you no longer are in the realm of reason. And the only way to bring reason back is through a military balance of force. And he's not in Istanbul today, but he will have to come another time. And the only time we will be able to bring Russia back into it is after a defeat of Putin. Whoever that.
I don't want to monopolize the truth up here, but Sonja, very quickly before we open up for the audience here.
Well, I'll be short. First of all, I think Europe has to confront Russian malign influence, not only in Serbia and the region, but also Western Europe, Germany specifically, and some other France, and so on. So this is a very strong tool which Russia has against Europe. And I think Europeans should help Russian dissidents, journalists, civic society, to prepare them for what is to come after Putin, because we can't speak about Putin's end tomorrow or in 2 months, because it will take time. And so far he has been decoupling Russia from Europe. If Russia is to come back, you have to prepare people who will bring Russia back. And there are many Russians, maybe some of them are here, that need help and that need to be encouraged to continue with their fight. So.
And again, the moral support, knowing that there are principles that also even Russia in principle have signed up to, and that we hold them accountable to that. Now, I will take, I think, 3 questions and then throw them back to the panel here. There are microphones along your seats there, so please find the closest microphone. Do I see any raised hands? I see very few raised hands. So, we have the gentleman there in the brown sweater. There, you, please. And please also introduce yourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
and brief, quick comments or questions.
Thank you. My name is Christoph Bender. I'm with the European Stability Initiative. Thanks for a really great debate. I have one question to Ambassador Torstila. I'm fully with you on the dichotomy that you know between Helsinki approach and realist approach, Mersheimer. Is this okay with the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm fully with you. You know, we need to kind of to stick to these principles, but my question relates rather to the format. I mean, when we look at the OSCE's, you know, anonymity principle, it's essentially blocked, cannot really do very much these days. So the very undiplomatic, or rather undiplomatic question to you is, and I hope for also an undiplomatic answer, is in your view, does the OSCE still has a role to play? And if yes, what kind of role would that be? Thank you.
Thank you. There was some more hands raised. So yeah, I want to have some balance here. So the gentleman there at the end. You, exactly you, yes.
Thank you. Gianpaolo Accardo from Vox Europe, one of the media partners. My question was partially answered by the last round of intervention, and it's basically how can Europe coexist with the current Russia, provided that it's very likely that Putin will not be defeated on the field in Ukraine, and maybe Western powers don't want him to be defeated. So what is the realistic possible coexistence with the current Russia, knowing also that Russia, even if there is a kind of settlement, will always be able to wage a hybrid war on Europe by damaging cables, underwater cables, by intervening in its internet, in everything that is connected through internet, and everything that makes our societies open and democratic in the end.
And the last third question, and I want to have some geographical balance and perhaps also some gender balance. So I'm looking for... There, please, introduce it.
Yes, thank you. I'm Russian, actually. I just came from the Finnish parliament, from the conference that have been the whole day over there with the Ukrainians about Ukrainian children. And I was the one Russian, actually, over there, and about stolen Ukrainian children that are in Russia. And I am Irina Vesikko, the founder of the Democratic Community of Russian Speakers in Finland. This community is already on Kremlin's unwanted list, so if I go there, I go to the prison for 6 years, I guess. And I've been living here in Finland for 27 years, so I'm just... and I kind of represent this our Russian opposition, and we are holding all the time the conferences. I just came from Brussels, and next week we have the conference of anti-war committee over there. And
the question is?
The question is, do you believe that what we are afraid of? That West want to come back to the business as usual. Is it possible, or because our goal is regime change, actually, not dealing with Putin anymore. So because it's too dangerous, it's about security of the Europe that we're concerned of, and that's why. What do you think about it? And do Russian opposition have any choices, and what we have to do? Maybe some comments about that.
Okay, thank you. So 3 questions here. How can we? What use can we make of the OSCE as it is? And I think you're not retired. You are retired, so you're not an active Finnish diplomat.
Retired a long time ago. I can be blunt. I can be really blunt. I don't have to.
But also the 2 questions, which I think are somewhat related, on how can we coexist with Russia or Putin's Russia, or is it at all possible to coexist or to have some kind of business as usual with Putin's Russia, and what are the sort of the necessary preconditions for moving on? But Pertti, again, you are ready with your microphone.
Yes. I mean, the question was about whether is the OSCE relevant today? Does it have a role? It does not have any whatsoever role when it comes to the peace negotiations. I mean, may have a role then thereafter when we come to the monitoring role of any organization. But I would very seriously warn us all of Russian peacekeepers on the demarcation line, the future demarcation line. I think most of the Finns, my countrymen, think that the CSC process, Helsinki process, and the OSCE is the same thing. But they are totally 2 different worlds. I mean, the OSCE, the CSCE was a product of the Cold War, etc., and it ended in Paris, 1990, or in Budapest, 1994, when the conference became an institution. And I think that was not the right decision, because conference played a much better role than the organization has ever done. For me personally, the OSCE is a deception. It's a failure. It's one of those organizations, I mean, we have many of them, who has not been able to fulfill the task it was given. We had high expectations in Helsinki 1992. There was another summit in Helsinki 1992, you may remember. But the OSCE has never achieved the responsibility and has not met with the expectations we put on it.
Maybe to follow up, Pertti, is because, I mean, as OSCE ambassador, I thought you could describe OSCE having 3 assets. One is the much cherished idea of a platform for dialogue and diplomacy. The other one is this toolbox. We have the autonomous institutions, field missions, confidence building measures, and so forth. But you could add the 3rd one is, of course, the normative, upholding the respect for the principles and the commitments. What you're saying is basically, where we need the consensus to use the toolbox and for the dialogue, there's no. But shouldn't we really stick to uphold? The OSCE has a value in upholding the norms and sticking, because if we declare OSCE dead, we also declare the normative base dead.
Well, I mean, it's a toolbox, and it's a toolbox which we should not throw away, because there's not another alternative. And let's keep it in place. I mean, international organizations practically never die. I think the Western European Union has still a secretariat in Paris. I wonder if the League of Nations has a secretariat somewhere. I mean, but really, they never die away. This one, I mean, your dear OSCE, let's keep it intact, and maybe for tomorrow.
For tomorrow,
maybe for tomorrow, but today it doesn't have a role.
Because there is a danger that the OSCE as an organization looks for relevance, and I think this is what's happened also with the Minsk agreements, the trilateral and so forth, and the SMM, the monitoring mission, because it wants to be relevant and it wants to keep up the dialogue. But if you want to keep a dialogue with someone who wants to ruin the whole normative base, you enter into a slippery slope of making compromises, and actually, instead of having the criteria that everything the OSCE should do should be aiming at returning respect for the principles, which is territorial integrity and sovereignty, the OSCE entered into a game where it was sort of undermining the principles, but it wanted to be relevant, it wanted to be engaged in the discussions, having a monitoring mission and so forth. And I think this is an inherent tension there, which is perhaps too little discussed. But how? Can we live with Russia, Putin's Russia? How should we do that? Is there any way that we can return to some kind of normality, with or without Putin, with Russia?
One word about the OSCE. Yes, I agree fully with what you said. It has become sort of irrelevant. However, if there is a ceasefire of sorts agreed in Istanbul or elsewhere, you will need monitors. And as we know, Russians refuse, or so far, the European monitors. The OSCE may, since Russia is part of the OSCE, may be the only framework within which the European monitors will be able to fulfill that function. Anyway, I put that with a question mark. I'm not a diplomat. I don't know whether this is feasible at all. Then, to your point, you said, can the West return to business as usual? There is no West anymore. This is
maybe rephrase it. Can Europe?
This is a problem.
Can the European Union?
Well, so I rephrase it that way. So this is a question. We have one part of the West which is wanting to return to business as usual, and I let you judge of the way it is doing it, and we will have to ask Mr. Witkov how far he's getting with Putin, without his own translator being present, incidentally. Okay, so then the question is, can the Europeans get? I would say that is not on the cards now. Nobody is proposing that. There's new rounds of sanctions by the EU imposed. There is disengagement from the dependency of Russian energy supply. That took time, but it is now finally complete. For instance, the Czechs only now are cutting off. This is 3 years after the end of the war. Only now. It takes time to get disengaged. So the disengagement from dependency on Russian energy, etc., etc. So I would say, no, this is the opposite of returning to business as usual. There will be a return to sort of business as usual when you have a ceasefire, a peace process. Ukraine will be engaged in a process of negotiating its accession into the European Union. We'll have a new European landscape, and if Russia will be accepting peacefully that kind of arrangement, well, then there may be a return to business as usual.
I actually want to say one thing, because that's I think the role or the model how to behave to Russia is actually now in countries in northern part of Europe, northern eastern part of Europe, Baltic states, Poland, and Scandinavian countries, seem to know much better than anybody else how to behave, and that's why I'm so happy to be in Finland now. That's actually I started to trust, if you say, to the West, in the sense that when Scandinavia is able, Sweden government is able to speak, hard words, and giving, money and weapons to Ukraine. Europe is not lost. We can still make it, and I think that Russia, the only way how to deal with it is, and we know all that we know, Russia has to understand that Russia cannot win. That's the only way. Brezhnev understood that in that competition. And Putin has to understand that as well.
Sonja, business as usual in Russia, and you come from a country where there seems to be some proponents as business as usual and based on the Slavic and Orthodox Brotherhood and so forth.
Well, I think Balkans is a vulnerable point in terms of Russian influence, and Europe didn't close it. Europe did nothing to sort of win Serbia in a proper way. Instead, it was appeasing Serbia and giving Vučić's space to manipulate, to play among 4 pillars of our foreign policy. And this is really going on for 15 years now, or maybe even longer. But during Vučić's time, because he signed Brussels Agreement, he was really, in a way, very much appeased to, and he was tolerated all these years. And now, after he went to Moscow, which was demonstration of Putin's need to show that he's not isolated by the West. And the whole global South went there. And what did Europe do to win global South as well? Because this is a very important card in Putin's hands. So I think Europe had 500 million of Europeans versus 100 million of Russians. That's amazing that we are having a debate here as we are having, instead of sort of looking for some kind of European galvanization along these lines, how to preserve the security framework and how to sort of confront Russia in a more imaginative way. And I think the biggest problems are certain countries in the West which don't have this fear. They don't share your fear or our fear. Mine certainly, because I am sort of pro-European. Maybe many others in Serbia are, quite well off with Russian influence. But talking about what is going on in Serbia now, most of these young people went to the West to explain what is happening. They didn't go to Moscow. So I think there needs to be more sophisticated approach and to support students. Europe was too late in supporting them, in recognizing their relevance for Serbia and also for the region. Students showed very mature attitudes towards the others, Muslims in Sanjak, Croats, any other national minority, and they are national, but they are not against others. They are religious, but they are not against other religions. So that can be a game changer in the region. And I think it's very important to pay attention what is going on in Serbia now, because it can also take the wrong direction. I think it's time now to recognize the relevance of what is going on in Serbia. And also in the meantime, you also have to devote more attention to the global South, to offer something that will be recognized not as a colonial sort of practice, which is very much, very often mentioned in those countries, but with something more attractive, something that will also help them to understand the new momentum in the world. It's not only West versus East, it's disappearing.
More European resolve, more European self-confidence, and I think we have the resources. Now, between us, there's mine waiting out there, so I want to go back to the panel here. I think we have done the journey from 1975 and before 1975 to today's.
If you have
but you soon. But I think really we are at this really crossroads for European future, because I don't think we can go back to any kind of status quo, and we are faced now with two existential shocks and two existential questions. The first one is, are we in the risk of having to somehow de facto accept that Russia can harvest fruits of its aggression and nuclear blackmail? And that's the question that should have been since 2014, but at least it should be prominent since 2022, and that's the Zeitenwende that we have not yet fully internalized and operationalized. But now, since this spring, we're faced with a second existential shock question. Will there be pressure on us in Europe to not only accept, but to legitimize Russia harvesting fruits of its aggression in Ukraine? Now, 30 seconds each. Are we doomed? Is defeatism and fatalism, or can Europe sort of regain the agency and the posture and sort of regain the spirit of Helsinki and the idea of European project? So I will go in reverse order. 30 seconds each. Jacques.
No, I don't think we are doomed, so long as we stick to who we are and what we believe in, and therefore we have to defend liberal democracy in times of rising authoritarian populism, not just in Russia, but elsewhere. No mention. And secondly, if we move from defending the peace project, which has worked wonders among us, but confronting the security challenge outside. And that means, perhaps not all of the EU together, but I'm a believer in the Weimar Triangle, Poland, Germany, France.
Now you have 10 seconds left.
Plus the Nordics.
And Turkey.
Plus the Brits for security. That's a coalition of the willing. And that will serve the security framework to make sure that the other purpose that I had mentioned, which is just as important.
New European formats. Martin.
I have not much to say about that, but I was still, Jacques is much better in thinking about these geopolitical shifts. And so what I know, not only from my perspective, but if Europe gives in and start to legitimize Russian demands, it's for Europe, it's over. That's the problem. It's a crucial problem. I just wish and hope that European understands that.
It's understanding what's at stake. Sonja, 30 seconds.
Well, I think this is a big challenge for Europe, and I believe it can make it. I think Poland, among willing ones, has a very important role as a country which is on front line, and I think it only needs time. We are here in lack of time, I would say, late reactions, and I believe that Europe can do it. I think too many people believe or abide with the European values and European lifestyle. All migrants are coming to Europe, not to Russia or China. And I think 300,000 Russians in Serbia now would gladly go to the Western Europe. So there is a lot of attraction in for European values. And I think this is the main, I would say, asset for Europeans to continue to believe in their values. I think there is a problem within Europe itself because we have all these right-wing populist movements which are nourished by Russia. But anyway, these are also reflection of genuine problems within these countries. But this has to be confronted in a more imaginative way, not in the way maybe that Macron does, but maybe in some other countries. But anyway, this is a problem which can be solved because populism doesn't give answers to
there is hope.
Yes.
Pertti.
If I remember correctly, Fredrik, you said that the Helsinki Final Act was the Old Testament.
Yes.
I think it's the Bible. It's the Bible, and the Paris Charter is the New Testament.
New Testament, exactly.
That's
yes. Yeah.
So it's the
but
Bible.
The new and old, it's the Bible together.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian.
Yes, and we will have to keep that Bible book open to the rest of the world as well.
Yes.
It's not only a European thing. World order is changing dramatically, and therefore the Helsinki Decalogue, the 10 principles, many of them are shared in a positive way with the rest of the world. For instance, the territorial integrity.
Yeah. And
I think that this should be the melody that we are passing forward. But I have a story. If you give me 2 minutes about a memory, another memory.
A quick memory.
Yeah, a quick memory. We were approaching the Eurovision singing contest rather soon.
Yes, which Sweden will win with Finnish help.
On Saturday, I will give you an example from the Dipoli days. 53 years ago. I already told you about the seating arrangement, but the harmonious way how the Europeans are singing together. The story of the languages is a good one. As hosts, we Finns, we were offering 3 languages: English, Russian, and French. Traditionally diplomatic languages. Federal Republic was not happy with this. They protested strongly. They said that the whole thing is about the German issue. We have to have the German language. Otherwise, East Germans will speak Russian, and we will have to speak English or French. The East Germans were not so eager to have German language, but finally, we as organizers, we understood, okay, this must be the case, and German language became the 4th official language. But it was not over. The Italian ambassador came to the Secretary General saying that, don't you Finns know that, we have 5 Italian-speaking participants in the conference? I started counting Italy, Switzerland perhaps, yeah. I forgot the Holy See, San Marino, and Malta. When the Spanish ambassador, when the Spanish government had noticed that the Italians were, doing the, backdoor policies, they said, don't you Finns know that there are 500 million Spanish speakers in the world? And we ended up in 6 official languages, which is 1 language more than the United Nations have. And I think from your times, Vienna, and today still, 6 languages are the official languages of harmonious European way to sing together. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. So, a warm round of applause for the panelists. And I think that we have sort of set the table. There are a lot of questions on this table for the upcoming discussions, and thank you again. With that, Karl-Henrik, or there is wine served outside, I think. So, and the conversation goes on. Now it starts, and the dialogue, and sharing of anecdotes.